1 million years before the Jedi existed, beings made of pure force energy moved entire stars like chess pieces. They built the galaxy itself. We're talking about the Celestials. These weren't just powerful aliens. They were architects on a scale nobody's ever matched since. The Celestials could change their shape at will. Some stories say they existed as living energy merged with the Force. Others claim they started as regular beings who evolved into something way beyond mortal understanding. Either way, they operated on a level that makes modern technology look like cave paintings. Here's what they actually built. The entire Corellian system, with its 5 inhabitable worlds, every single planet in that system sits in a perfect circular orbit. Scientists figured out thousands of years later that this can't happen naturally. Something had to move those planets into place and hold them there. They did this by constructing Centerpoint Station, a device so massive it could grab celestial bodies and drag them through hyperspace like moving furniture. Think about that for a second. They built a machine that moves planets. The Celestials didn't stop with one star system. They created the Hapis cluster, engineered the Cathal Rift, and shaped the Volta system. Each of these projects required manipulating gravity on scales that bend our understanding of physics. But their most extreme creation was the Maw. This is a cluster of black holes chained together near Kessel. The Celestials literally grabbed singularities from across the galaxy and positioned them in formation. They turned black holes into construction materials. Why would anyone do this? We'll get to that. For now, just understand that the Maw became the most important prison in galactic history. The Celestials didn't work alone. They needed help to build their cosmic projects, so they recruited entire species to serve as laborers. The most important were the Killiks. These insect creatures operated as a hive mind, which made them perfect for massive construction jobs. Thousands of Killik workers could coordinate instantly through their shared consciousness. The Celestials spread Killik colonies down major hyperspace routes and put them to work. The Killiks helped build Centerpoint Station, which they called Kolaralok in their own language. They witnessed the creation of the Maw and the Volta system. Everything the Celestials built, the Killiks had a hand in making. Other species got drafted too. The Gree became renowned technologists under Celestial guidance. The Qua on Dathomir learned to build gates that could transport people instantly between worlds. Even the Rakata served the Celestials at first, though that relationship went bad later. Not everyone wanted to be part of this cosmic construction crew. Some advanced races took one look at the Celestials and decided to hide. The Sharu had built an impressive civilization of their own. When the Celestials showed up, the Sharu deliberately made themselves primitive. They buried their cities under pyramids and pretended to be simple creatures until the Celestials left them alone. The Colomai just retreated to their homeworld and stayed there. Being noticed by the Celestials apparently wasn't something most species wanted. This tells you something about how overwhelming the Celestials were. Advanced civilizations with their own technology chose to play dumb or hide rather than interact with them. The Celestials didn't just move planets around, they seeded life on hundreds of worlds. Humans, for example, probably originated in the core worlds because the Celestials put them there. Same with species like the Corellians, Drawl, and Solonians. By 100,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Celestials had contacted or overseen the development of major species, including humans, the Gree, the Qua, the Sharu, the Kolumi, and the Tong. Each was at a different stage of advancement, but all fell under celestial influence in some way. This means the Celestials actively shaped which species thrived and where they ended up. They were gardeners on a galactic scale. planting civilizations like flowers in carefully chosen locations. The Celestials even shaped hyperspace itself. They built a barrier around the entire galaxy. This barrier shows up as dangerous hyperspace disturbances at the edge of known space. It's why the western regions became the unknown regions. The routes out there are so tangled and dangerous that even modern navigators avoid them. Why build a galactic fence? Two theories exist. Maybe the Celestials wanted to keep threats from outside the galaxy from getting in. Or maybe they wanted to keep something inside the galaxy contained. Some scholars think they were trying to trap the Rakata before they could escape and spread. Others believe the barrier was meant to isolate something called Mangal, a predatory entity that consumed entire civilizations. Either way, the Celestials didn't just organize individual star systems. They drew the boundaries of the entire galaxy and controlled who could travel where. Nobody knows the names of individual Celestials. They left almost no personal records. We know they existed because of what they built and because other species remembered them. The Killik hive, called Thurut, is the oldest hive mind still functioning. Thurut's collective memory goes back to the Celestial era. The hive claims to have witnessed key events, including something called the birth of the Ones. The Ones were a family of 3 incredibly powerful Force users who apparently had connections to the Celestials. Whether they were Celestials themselves or something the Celestials created, the records don't say clearly. Later civilizations imagined there must have been some kind of ruling council. They called it the Architect Triumvirate, picturing 3 leaders overseeing creation. But that might just be myth-making. The Celestials remain mysterious. Some Killik legends mention figures like Thuru the Shaper, which might be the Thurut hive's own role in events. Another name that appears is the Silent Builder, possibly referring to Killik queens who worked on massive projects without recognition. These aren't confirmed historical figures. They're more like symbolic names the Killiks used to describe their part in building the wonders of that age. During the Celestial Reign, the Force existed in perfect balance. There was order on a cosmic scale. The Celestials operated beyond simple ideas of light and dark. They worked on a different level entirely, maintaining equilibrium through their actions rather than through philosophy. Later Force users, particularly the Jedi, looked back at this era as a golden age, a time when godlike beings actively kept the universe stable. The term celestial became synonymous with a higher order of Force-attuned beings in Jedi texts. Some scholars speculate the Celestials eventually merged with the cosmic force itself. Maybe they became part of the energy field they'd spent eons manipulating. Maybe they guide destiny from beyond in ways nobody can detect. Or maybe they just left or faded away. The truth is lost to time. What matters is that their era of cosmic balance set everything up for what came next. The galaxy had been shaped and ordered by beings who understood the Force on levels nobody since has matched. But that equilibrium couldn't last forever. The very tools and knowledge the Celestials created would soon be turned to darker purposes. The servant species they'd empowered would rebel, and within the Force itself, a split was forming that would shake the foundations of reality. The age of the architects was ending. The age of chaos was about to begin. While the Celestials ruled the galaxy, something new emerged from the Force itself. A family of 3 beings who would become known as the Ones. The Killik hive mind, the root, remembered their birth. According to that ancient memory, the ones formed from a geyser of pure force energy on a tropical world. They didn't grow up like normal beings. They simply came into existence, already powerful beyond measure. The family had 3 members: a father who embodied balance itself, a daughter who represented the light side of the Force, which ancient cultures called Ashla, and a son who embodied the dark side, known in old texts as Bogan. These weren't random Force users who got really strong. They were living representations of the Force's fundamental nature. The father kept equilibrium between his children. The daughter channeled creation, healing, and life. The son expressed change, ambition, and darkness. The Killik memory suggests they were direct manifestations of the Celestials' will. Maybe the Celestials created them on purpose. Maybe the Force itself shaped them as a response to the Celestials' work. Either way, they existed as something between mortals and gods. The ones made their home on a lush jungle world where the Force ran strong. This planet had 2 locations that would later cause massive problems. The first was called the Font of Power. This was a wellspring of pure dark side energy, concentrated to unbelievable levels. The second was the Pool of Knowledge, containing pure light side insight and power. The father knew exactly how dangerous these places were. He warned his children over and over: never drink from the font, never bathe in the pool. These weren't suggestions. They were rules meant to protect everyone, including the son and daughter themselves. For a long time, the family listened. The daughter wandered the forests, nurturing plants and animals. The son explored caves and shadows, learning about the depths of the Force. The father watched over both, maintaining the delicate balance between them. They lived in harmony. The galaxy had its cosmic engineers in the Celestials. The Force had its cosmic family in the Ones. Everything worked, but that balance was about to shatter. Over time, the son and daughter started pushing boundaries. The son grew curious about his limits. How much power could he actually wield? What could he accomplish if he stopped holding back? The daughter felt similar pulls. She wanted to understand everything, to see all possibilities, to reach the fullest expression of the light side. Their natures were drawing them toward those forbidden wells. The son toward the font of power, the daughter toward the pool of knowledge. Eventually, they gave in to temptation. The son went first. He approached the font of power in secret and drank from it. Raw dark side energy flooded into him, magnifying everything he already was. His strength multiplied. His emotions intensified. His ambitions grew beyond control. The daughter made her own choice. She found the pool of knowledge and bathed in its waters. Light side power and infinite wisdom poured into her. She emerged transformed, her abilities amplified to levels that matched her brother's new strength. Both claimed they'd done it to better serve their purposes. The son argued that more power meant he could better understand the dark side and help his father maintain balance. The daughter believed greater knowledge would let her protect life more effectively. They were lying to themselves. The moment they used those wells, the balance between them broke. The son and daughter had been equals before. Their opposite natures held in check by their father and their own restraint. Now they were supercharged versions of themselves with no middle ground left. They started carving up their world. The son claimed the darker regions of the jungle as his territory. The daughter took the brighter areas as hers. What had been a shared home became a divided realm. Small arguments turned into serious disputes. Disputes became confrontations. Confrontations became battles. When the son and daughter fought, the planet itself reacted. Storms erupted from nowhere. The ground shook. Animals fled in panic. The Force screamed with the pain of their conflict. This was something new in the galaxy. The Celestials had built wonders and maintained order. Now, two beings embodying opposite sides of the Force were tearing at each other, and reality bent around them. The father found himself in an impossible position. He was supposed to keep his children in balance, but they'd made themselves too powerful to easily control. He spent his days mediating fights, trying to calm the son's aggression and soothe the daughter's righteous anger. It wasn't sustainable. The father knew that if this continued, his children would eventually destroy not just their world, but potentially tear holes in the fabric of space itself. Their power had grown beyond what even he could safely contain in an open environment. The conflicts between the son and daughter did something else too. They altered the current of the Force. This is hard to explain in normal terms, but the Killik memory describes it as changing the flow of time and destiny itself. When two beings that powerful represent pure opposites and then go to war, it creates ripples. Those ripples spread through the Force like cracks spreading through ice. What seemed like a family problem was actually the beginning of something that would threaten the entire galaxy. Some later scholars speculated that the Celestials held a council to discuss this crisis. Whether they actually met or just communicated through the Force, the Celestials recognized that the ones represented both an asset and a danger. On one hand, having beings who embodied the Force's nature could help maintain cosmic balance. On the other hand, if those beings fought each other, they could undo everything the Celestials had built. The father essentially became the head of what you could call a Celestial Council of Balance. His job was to ensure the light and dark didn't rip the universe apart. Other celestial entities might have advised him. Ancient groups like the Whills might have offered guidance. But ultimately, the responsibility fell on the father. He had to find a solution. His answer was Mortis. The Celestials had the technology to create pocket dimensions, realms that existed outside normal space. The father worked with them to build one specifically designed to contain his family. They called it Mortis. It was a world that could only be reached through a massive monolith that served as a gateway. Once inside, the rules of reality worked differently. Time flowed strangely. The landscape shifted and changed. It was beautiful and surreal, and completely isolated from the rest of the galaxy. Mortis would be both a sanctuary and a prison. The father could keep his children there, away from everyone else. Their battles wouldn't threaten other worlds. Their power couldn't spill out and cause damage. The father convinced the son and daughter to go with him. Maybe he persuaded them it was for the best. Maybe he had to use his authority to force them. Either way, the three of them entered Mortis and sealed the gateway behind them. This was one of the most important moments in galactic history, even though almost nobody knew it happened. The ones removed themselves from the temporal galaxy. They became legends, myths, echoes in ancient stories. The Force gods went into exile to protect the universe from themselves. Later cultures would remember them in fragments. The Night Sisters on Dathomir told stories about a fanged god and a winged goddess. They didn't know they were talking about the son and daughter, but the memory persisted across thousands of years. The ones themselves took on creature forms sometimes. The daughter appeared as a griffin-like being, all grace and light. The sun manifested as something winged and monstrous, representing the dark side's power. But underneath those forms, they were still a family. A father trying to maintain balance, a daughter committed to the light, a son drawn to darkness. Their story had just begun, and the worst was yet to come. The seeds of chaos had been planted the moment the son and daughter drank from those forbidden wells. The current of the Force had been altered. The balance the father worked so hard to maintain was more fragile than anyone realized. And in that fragility, something terrible was waiting to emerge. A mortal woman walked into the lives of the Force gods and changed everything. Her name is lost to history, but her actions would nearly destroy the galaxy. Nobody knows exactly how she arrived on the One's world. Some stories say she wandered there. Others suggest she was brought. What matters is that she came as a servant, nothing more. She cooked meals. She cleaned their home. She offered companionship to beings who existed on a level she could barely comprehend. The Ones accepted her presence, and over time, they started calling her the Mother. Not because she birthed them, but because she cared for them like family. And she was good at it. The son and daughter were still clashing regularly when the mother arrived. Their fights shook mountains and split the sky. The father spent all his energy trying to keep them from tearing each other apart. The mother changed that dynamic. She had a gentle way of reminding the siblings what they meant to each other. When tensions rose, she'd mediate. When the son grew angry, she'd calm him. When the daughter felt righteous fury, the mother would soothe her. She even found creative ways to redirect the son's destructive impulses. Once, she convinced him to use his Force lightning not as a weapon, but as a tool. He carved beautiful chambers into the rock walls of their home, channeling his power into creation instead of destruction. For the first time since they'd drunk from the forbidden wells, the son and daughter achieved something like peace. The fighting stopped. The family functioned. The father's burden lightened. All because of one mortal woman who cared deeply about keeping them together. But she had a problem that no amount of wisdom or kindness could fix. She was aging. The Ones existed outside of time in many ways. They didn't grow old. Their bodies didn't weaken. They would remain in their prime forever. The mother had no such gift. Years passed, and her hair went gray. Lines appeared on her face. Her body grew frailer. She watched herself decline while the family she loved stayed eternally young. This terrified her. She'd found purpose with the Ones. They were her family now, and she genuinely loved them. The thought of leaving them through death filled her with desperation. Worse, she could feel her influence fading. As she grew weaker, the son and daughter started arguing again. Small disagreements, then bigger ones. The peace she'd worked so hard to build was cracking. She knew what would happen if she died. The father would be left alone to manage his children. They'd go back to war. They might destroy each other. Everything would fall apart. She couldn't let that happen. The mother had learned about the font of power and the pool of knowledge during her time with the family. The father had forbidden everyone from using them. But she knew the son had drunk from the font. She knew the daughter had bathed in the pool. That's how they'd become so powerful. That's how they'd gained their immortality. She started thinking, if drinking from one well gave you incredible power, what would happen if you used both? If you combined the font's dark side energy with the pool's light side wisdom, maybe you'd gain everything the ones had. Maybe you'd become like them. Maybe you'd live forever and keep your family safe for all eternity. The logic seemed sound to someone driven by love and fear. She convinced herself this was the answer. One day, the son and daughter got into another argument in the courtyard. The father rushed to separate them, trying to keep the situation from escalating. The mother saw her chance. While everyone was distracted, she slipped away. She found the font of power first. It pulsed with dark energy, raw and dangerous. She didn't hesitate. She drank from it. Dark side power flooded into her. It felt like being struck by lightning and drowned in ice water at the same time. Everything about her intensified. Her fear, her love, her desperation, all of it magnified to unbearable levels. But she wasn't done. She ran to the pool of knowledge and threw herself into its waters. Light side energy poured through her. Infinite wisdom, endless insight, the secrets of the Force itself. Two opposite energies met inside a mortal body never meant to contain either one, let alone both. The father sensed something wrong immediately. He rushed to the pool and used the Force to pull her out of the water. He was too late. The transformation had already begun. The font and pool had done their work. The mother was gone. Something else had taken her place. The woman who rose from that pool was Abeloth. Her appearance twisted and changed. Sometimes she looked almost human. Other times she appeared monstrous, with too many limbs and a face that shifted like smoke. She was immortal now, yes, but at a cost nobody could have anticipated. Everything good in her had been corrupted. Her love became obsession. Her desire to protect became a need to control. Her wisdom turned into cunning madness. She was insatiable, unstoppable, and completely detached from any moral restraint, and she was more powerful than anyone expected. Abeloth turned on the son and daughter immediately. She hit them with storms of Force energy that made their own abilities look weak. The two beings who embodied light and dark, who had fought each other to a standstill countless times, were forced to their knees. They bowed before her or risked being destroyed on the spot. This had never happened before. The son and daughter were Force gods. They were living representations of fundamental cosmic powers. Nothing should have been able to make them submit. Abeloth did it easily. She started calling herself the beloved Queen of the Stars. In her twisted mind, she was still protecting her family. She'd keep them safe by ruling over them. They'd be hers forever, under her control, never able to leave or fight or hurt each other again. She'd become exactly what the father had feared when he forbade anyone from using those wells, a being with godlike power and no wisdom to wield it properly. The son reacted in a predictable way. Part of him was horrified. Abeloth threatened even him, and the son valued his own power and freedom above everything else. But another part of him was intrigued. Abeloth's dark side strength was beyond anything he'd seen. If she could force the daughter to submit, maybe they could work together. Maybe they could finally tip the balance away from the father's control and toward pure darkness. Some records suggest the son initially helped Abeloth, or at least didn't fight her as hard as he could have. He saw an opportunity in her rise to power. That changed quickly. Abeloth demanded absolute submission from both siblings. She wanted to dominate the son just as much as the daughter. Any alliance between them shattered the moment the son realized she wouldn't share power. She wanted all of it. The father stood between Abeloth and his children, trying to protect them from the monster the mother had become. But even he wasn't sure he could contain her. Abeloth's transformation sent shockwaves through the Force itself. If you'd been Force-sensitive anywhere in the galaxy at that moment, you would have felt something wrong. A scream in the fabric of reality. A cold wave of dread with no apparent source. Animals across countless worlds panicked for reasons they couldn't explain. Stars seemed to dim. The air itself felt heavier. Sensitive species reported nightmares of a dark presence awakening. Chaos had been born, and it wore the face of someone who'd only wanted to protect the people she loved. This is the tragedy at the heart of Abeloth's story. She didn't start as a villain. She started as a caretaker who was good at her job. She genuinely loved the family she served. Her intentions were pure. But fear and desperation drove her to break a fundamental rule. She tried to claim power she wasn't meant to have. And in doing so, she became the very threat she'd hoped to prevent. The loving mother who'd brought peace to a broken family transformed into the bringer of chaos, a being whose existence would trigger a war between the oldest powers in the galaxy. The father had already seen his children fall into imbalance when they used the font and pool. Now he watched the only person who'd helped restore peace become something far worse. The stage was set for the war of the Force gods. The Celestials and their allies would need to mobilize against a threat unlike anything they'd faced before. And at the center of it all was a woman who'd only wanted her family to stay together forever. Sometimes the worst monsters are born from the best intentions. Abeloth's transformation didn't just threaten the ones. It threatened reality itself. The moment she became the bringer of chaos, something fundamental broke in the Force. Ancient texts mention that the current of the Force was altered and the flow of time itself changed. That's not poetic language. Reality actually warped around her. Abeloth could twist life however she wanted. Plants withered when she passed. Animals went rabid. Entire forests mutated into nightmarish versions of themselves, and her influence spread far beyond the world where she'd transformed. Force-sensitive beings across the galaxy felt waves of terror with no apparent source. Stars flickered, gravity fluctuated. The natural order that the Celestials had spent eons building started coming apart at the seams. The age of order was over. Creation itself faced the risk of unraveling back into primordial chaos. The father understood immediately what had to be done. Abeloth needed to be stopped, no matter the cost. He was heartbroken. The woman who'd been their mother, who'd brought peace to his family, was gone. In her place stood something that wanted to consume everything. But the father put duty first. His first move was tactical. He took the son and daughter and got them away from Abeloth. The records say he left her stranded on their world, at least temporarily. She was incredibly powerful, but alone and isolated. That bought him time. The father sent out a call through the Force to every Celestial who remained. This was an emergency on a scale the galaxy had never seen. They needed to mobilize everything they had. The Celestials answered. So did their servant races. the industrious Kilix with their hive-mind coordination, the technologically advanced Gree, the force-sensitive Qua, everyone who could help build what came next. But the father needed more than workers. He needed warriors of the Force itself. The daughter and son did something unprecedented. They joined their minds directly with the Killik hive, specifically with the ancient Thurut hive. By merging their consciousness with thousands of Killik workers, they could channel their godlike powers through the entire swarm. Every Killik became an extension of the One's will. Workers who normally built nests could now perform engineering feats that would take deities to accomplish. The Killiks gained access to force abilities and knowledge they'd never possessed on their own. Together, they set out to build the ultimate prison. The plan was audacious even by celestial standards. They would trap Abeloth in a cage made of black holes. Centerpoint Station became the key to everything. This massive device could manipulate gravity on scales that bent physics. Under the direction of the son and daughter, the Killiks built additional installations to support it. One was Sinkhole Station, designed to act as a stabilizer and anchor point. Others included devices that some called maelstrom engines, titanic machines capable of moving celestial bodies like game pieces. Then came the hard part. They had to build the Maw. Using Centerpoint's unimaginable power, the Celestials reached across the galaxy and grabbed black holes. They dragged singularities through hyperspace itself, corralling them near the planet Kessel one by one. They positioned these black holes in formation. A dozen or more gravity wells locked in close orbit, creating a labyrinth that nothing could escape. This wasn't gentle work. Creating the Maw required tearing holes in space-time. The gravitational forces involved could have destroyed entire star systems if anything went wrong. The effort caused what some records call a shattering, disrupting hyperspace routes across the galaxy. But it worked. The Maw took shape, a swirling cluster of destruction waiting for its prisoner. While all this construction was happening, Abeloth wasn't sitting still. She left her world somehow and started spreading her influence across the stars. The war against her wasn't just about building prisons. There were actual battles. Celestial agents confronted her in combat that bent the rules of reality. Entire Killik hives channeled the daughter's light side power to push back against Abeloth's darkness, and the son complicated everything. He was born from the dark side. Part of him sympathized with Abeloth's raw power. Some legends suggest he secretly helped her at first, maybe sharing celestial plans or sabotaging efforts. He might have thought he could use her to eliminate the father and rule in chaos. That was a mistake. Abeloth didn't want an ally. She wanted to dominate everyone, including the son. Once he realized she'd enslave or destroy him just as readily as anyone else, he switched sides completely. By the time the Maw was ready, the son fought alongside his father and sister. Maybe out of duty, probably out of self-preservation. But he fought. The final confrontation came when the Celestials lured Abeloth into the Maw. Maybe she was overconfident. Maybe they tricked her. Either way, she ventured into the heart of the cluster Centerpoint Station activated with full power. Its gravity field locked the black holes into their final configuration. The door slammed shut. Abeloth was trapped in a cage of swirling singularities. The Maw became the perfect prison. Anyone at its center would be pulled in multiple directions by competing gravity wells. Escape was virtually impossible. The chaotic forces even interfered with Abeloth's ability to project her power outward. But sealing her came at a cost. The daughter made a sacrifice. She poured a massive portion of her light side essence into the Maw's binding, creating a force seal that would hold Abeloth in place. This didn't end her physically, but it weakened her substantially. Some legends phrase it poetically, saying the daughter's light died out to quell the darkness that foreshadowed what would eventually happen to her. For now, she survived but diminished. The immediate threat was over. Abeloth was locked away. The galaxy was safe, but the cost was staggering. The war had shattered the Celestials' civilization. Many of them perished fighting Abeloth, or were drained by the immense force effort required to build the Maw. The strain of wielding Centerpoint Station's power at that level might have been catastrophic for them. Historical records show that around 30,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Celestials vanished, just gone. Maybe they died out. Maybe they departed the galaxy. Maybe they slipped into another dimension. One scholar suggested the hyperspace barrier they'd built became their own cage. Trapped by the disturbances they'd created, weakened by Abeloth's war, they fell victim to circumstances they couldn't control, and their former servants saw an opportunity. The Rakata, who'd been serving the Celestials for ages, chose this moment to rebel. They turned on their ancient masters and eliminated any remaining Celestials they could find. Records confirm that by 35,000 years before Yavin, the Rakata were openly hunting down their former gods. Abeloth's war had weakened the Celestials so much that the Rakata Infinite Empire could rise and sweep away what was left. The father looked at what remained and made a decision. The Celestials were gone or hiding. The galaxy was scarred. His own family had paid a terrible price. The daughter was weakened from her sacrifice. The son's soul was darkened further by his flirtation with Abeloth's chaos. The father himself was exhausted and heartbroken. He'd lost the mother he cared for and watched the ruin of his people. He realized something crucial. As long as the son and daughter remained active in the galaxy, there was a risk this could happen again. Abeloth might escape if either of them fell under her influence, or they might create new problems with their endless conflict. The father decided to remove them from the equation entirely. He led his children to Mortis, that pocket realm the Celestials had created. It would become their permanent home. A self-contained world where the father could keep the son and daughter in balance forever, far from anyone they might harm. It was both a refuge and a prison. The father locked the gateway behind them, the monolith sealed. From that point forward, the ones essentially vanished from history. They existed in Mortis, outside normal space and time, fighting their eternal struggle in seclusion. They wouldn't be seen again for roughly 30,000 years. The war of the Force Gods was over. Abeloth was bound. The chaos had been stopped, but the galaxy had lost its shepherds. The Celestials who'd maintained cosmic order were gone. The ones who embodied the Force's nature had exiled themselves. Even the Killiks were removed from the picture. Before the Celestials disappeared, they commanded the hives to migrate to the unknown regions. The Killiks were emptied from Alderaan and scattered beyond known space. Abeloth's prison was strong, but it wasn't guaranteed to be eternal. It needed constant maintenance. Centerpoint Station would have to keep stabilizing the Maw to prevent her from escaping. That responsibility passed to whoever came next. The galaxy entered a dark age. The gods had warred. and ordinary civilizations were left to fend for themselves. This war would fade into myth. Most species would never know it happened, but its consequences shaped everything that followed. The mantle of maintaining the Force's balance had passed from gods to mortals. The Jedi and Sith, who would emerge thousands of years later, inherited a responsibility they didn't understand. They'd be fighting over balance, without knowing that beings far more powerful had already waged that war and nearly torn the universe apart in the process. The Father had said it himself. His children nearly tore the fabric of the universe. To prevent that, the galaxy lost its caretakers. What came next would be up to ordinary beings. Force users who didn't have godlike power. Species who didn't understand the cosmic stakes. The baton had been passed. For better or worse, the galaxy's future was now in mortal hands. After the war, the galaxy fell silent. The Celestials were gone. The Ones had locked themselves away in Mortis. And what remained was an empty throne. By 30,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, every trace of the celestial species had vanished from known space. The beings who'd moved planets and built star systems simply weren't there anymore. Nobody knows exactly what happened to them. Maybe they were destroyed in the crossfire of the war. Maybe they fled the galaxy entirely. Maybe they transcended into the Force itself, becoming part of the energy they'd spent eons manipulating. One scholar named Innsmouth Bowen had a darker theory. He suggested the Celestials might have been trapped inside the galaxy by the very barrier they'd created. Weakened by the war with Abeloth, they fell victim to the rebellion of their own servants, the Rakata. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. The architects of reality were gone, and they'd left behind a power vacuum on a cosmic scale. The Killiks disappeared too. These industrious insect builders who'd helped create the Maw were forcibly removed from the galactic core. According to legend, after the Killiks finished constructing Centerpoint Station, the Celestials grew angry with them. Maybe the Killiks knew too much. Maybe the Celestials feared what they'd do without supervision. The hives were emptied from Alderaan and driven into the unknown regions. Some stories suggest the Killiks had a tendency to devour ecosystems. They'd consumed their own homeworld and were eyeing other inhabited planets. So the Celestials exiled them, scattered them beyond known space where they couldn't cause problems. By the time the Republic rose thousands of years later, Killiks were just myths. Strange hive mounds on Alderaan were the only proof they'd ever existed. The busy architects who'd helped build cosmic wonders became ghosts, their collective song silenced. Some hives survived in hibernation in the unknown regions, waiting for a time to resurface. But for now, they were gone from the story. The Celestials might have vanished, but they left behind evidence everywhere. Later historians called this the Echo Epoch, an age where only echoes of the gods remained. Centerpoint Station still floated at the heart of the Corellian system. The primitive inhabitants who eventually settled Corellia had no idea what it was. Some worshipped it, others tried to study it. Eventually, they'd reverse engineer parts of it, but they'd never fully understand what they'd found. Deep under the surface of Kessel, a planetary machine kept operating automatically. This celestial device had been built to track gravitational anomalies across the entire galaxy. It hummed along in the darkness, tended only by strange creatures called bogies who had no clue what it did. Smugglers would eventually discover it thousands of years later, still running, still monitoring forces they couldn't begin to comprehend. Near the Maw floated Sinkhole Station, a lonely outpost maintaining the balance of black holes that imprisoned Abeloth. Nobody visited it. Nobody remembered why it was there. But it kept doing its job. A silent warden for a prisoner the galaxy had forgotten. These devices became legends, stories spacers told each other about ancient machines that did impossible things. Most people dismissed them as superstition. The hyperspace anomalies the Celestials created didn't go anywhere either. The western edge of the galaxy remained cut off by gravitational disturbances. What became known as the unknown regions stayed unknown because the routes there were nearly impossible to navigate. That barrier the Celestials raised stayed up, an invisible monument to their power. It frustrated explorers for millennia. Some whispered that ancient things lurked in the unknown regions, remnants of celestial experiments, servant races gone feral in isolation. They weren't entirely wrong. Certain star systems bore obvious celestial fingerprints. The Corellian system with its perfectly circular orbits and hidden planetary repulsors. The Hapes cluster with its unique stellar arrangement. The Cathal Rift with its strange properties. Scholars in later eras would debate these systems endlessly. Were they natural formations, celestial constructions, Rakatan imitations? Most couldn't agree. The truth was simpler. These were celestial echoes, wondrous, enduring constructs that outlasted their creators but remained unexplained. Throughout this dark period, one group supposedly kept records of everything. The Whills. These mysterious beings are described as higher consciousness, sages deeply attuned to the Force. According to myth, they're the recorders of reality itself, compiling a journal of all events across time. The Whills rarely intervene. They just watch and write. But if the legends are true, somewhere in their ethereal archives lies a complete account of the War of the Force gods and what came after. They might have called this era the Time of Desolation, or the Echo Epoch, a period when the primary actors had left the stage and only their works remained. One fragment attributed to the Whills mentions the echo of the architect's hammer ringing in the void, a poetic way of saying the Celestials' impact was still felt even though they were gone. Some stories name specific Whills from this period. Orlix of the Whills, depicted as a sage who wrote the final stanza of the Celestials. He supposedly documented the end of their era so the knowledge would survive. Another figure appears in obscure legends as the seventh Whill of Containment. This being took on the duty of ensuring Abeloth's prison remained secure. The title suggests there was a council of Whills, and the seventh one became the silent warden of the Maw. Whether these were real individuals or symbolic representations doesn't really matter. The point is that some ancient consciousness was watching and remembering during the galaxy's dark age, even as most civilizations forgot. The Killiks weren't entirely wiped out. Their legacy survived in the Thurut Hive, the oldest and most isolated of all Killik colonies. Thurut carried the collective memory of everything that had happened, the rise of the Celestials, the birth of the Ones, the transformation of Abeloth, the war that followed. All of it lived in their hive mind like a dream that never faded. Thousands of years later, Luke Skywalker would communicate with Thurut and learn these ancient secrets. But during the Age of Ruin, the Hive simply preserved the knowledge in silence, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. You could call Thurut the scion of the Killiks, the heir to celestial history. The hive mind itself was the vessel carrying truths the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. As new civilizations emerged in the wake of the Celestials, they occasionally stumbled on relics from that bygone age. The Qua, who'd survived as celestial servants, left behind infinity gates and stargates. These devices could transport people instantly across the galaxy. Later cultures found them and either used them or were destroyed trying. The Night Sisters on Dathomir built their fortress on top of an old Qua gate ruin, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. The Gree retreated to their enclave but kept their advanced technology. Their hypergates were faint echoes of celestial science, impressive by any standard, but pale shadows of what once existed. The Sharu eventually woke from their self-imposed primitivism and dug up their buried cities. Inside, they found knowledge that had touched celestial concepts, though they couldn't fully understand it. Maybe pieces of Centerpoint Station prototypes drifted through space. Maybe blueprints for reality-bending machines ended up in data caches that explorers couldn't read. Some of these fragments inspired new creations. Others became myths about the powers of old gods. The Age of Ruin was characterized by eerie quiet. Most inhabitants of the galaxy had no idea an era had ended. They saw what was in front of them and nothing more. The Rakata were expanding their empire. The Gree stayed isolated. Various species were just beginning to explore space and form civilizations. But unseen by these mortals, the guiding hands that had shaped the cosmos were gone. The Pantheon had emptied. Olympus stood abandoned. The Force itself still flowed through all living things, but it was no longer actively managed by supreme beings. There was no fail-safe if something went wrong. No cosmic engineers to fix problems or maintain balance. This was both dangerous and necessary. Dangerous because threats like Abeloth could emerge without anyone powerful enough to stop them. Necessary because it allowed younger races to grow and exercise free will without gods dictating their path. The stage was set for mortals to rise as Force users. The Celestials no longer claimed the Force as their domain. Regular beings could start to tap into it, learn from it, be changed by it. The Age of Ruin gradually transitioned into an age of discovery. Species began stepping into roles that the Celestials and Ones had once filled. Champions of light and dark emerged from ordinary populations. They had no idea they were standing on the shoulders of giants. They didn't know about the war that had nearly torn reality apart. They couldn't see the echoes of divine engineering all around them. But they inherited the responsibility anyway. The fate of the Force's balance now rested with beings who hadn't asked for it and didn't understand the stakes. The gods were gone. What came next would be up to those who remained. Something changed in the galaxy after the Celestials vanished. Regular people started feeling the Force. The Celestials and Ones had wielded cosmic power on scales that bent reality. Now ordinary species were discovering their own connections to this energy field. Small connections, personal connections, but connections nonetheless. This happened in multiple places across the galaxy, but one location became the cradle of everything that followed. A planet in the deep core called Tython. Around 36,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, something mysterious occurred. Tython itself was a nexus of Force energy, unusually strong in ways nobody understood, and it called out. Pyramid-shaped ships appeared across the galaxy. They were called the Thoyor, and nobody knew who built them or how they worked. These vessels gathered Force-sensitive beings from dozens of worlds. Humans, Cathar, Daith, who would become ancestors of the Sith purebloods, Nabaron, and others. All of them felt drawn to board these ships. All of them ended up on Tython. Once there, isolated from the rest of the galaxy, these pilgrims founded something new. They called it the Jedi Order. The Jedi developed a philosophy that would echo through history. They understood the Force as something dual, something that required balance between opposing sides. They named the light side Ashla and the dark side Bogan. These weren't random choices. Tython had two moons visible in its sky, one bright and luminous called Ashla, one dark and shadowy called Bogan. The early Jedi saw this as a sign. Light and dark were two halves of a whole. You couldn't have one without the other. You couldn't neglect either side. True harmony existed in the middle, in the balance between extremes. This philosophy was serious business. If a Jedi fell too far toward Ashla, becoming too rigid or detached, they'd be exiled to the moon Ashla to meditate until they found balance again. If someone fell toward Bogan, overwhelmed by passion or anger, they'd be sent to the dark moon to find their center. The word Jedi itself meant mystic center in the language of the Dai Bendu monks. Everything about their order emphasized that center point between light and dark as the ideal state. In a way, they were recreating the Father's role among the ones. Not that they knew about the Father, but the principle was the same. Keep the extremes in check, maintain equilibrium, prevent either side from dominating. There were legends among Force traditions about something called the wellspring of life, a place where the Force concentrated so powerfully that life itself might have originated there. Some stories suggested this was where midichlorians first arose, those microscopic organisms that let beings connect with the Force. Others tied the wellspring to celestial experiments, suggesting the ancient architects had encouraged life to spread from that source. The details are fuzzy, but the core idea makes sense. As life thrived across the galaxy, certain beings gradually became Force-sensitive. This happened over generations, especially on worlds where the Force ran strong. Tython was one of those worlds. You could view the wellspring as the mythic starting point for mortal Force users. The moment when regular beings began tapping into power that had once belonged only to gods. The Jedi spent thousands of years on Tython refining their understanding. They built 9 great temples across the planet, each dedicated to a different aspect of the Force. One temple focused on combat, another on healing, a third on scientific study. Each represented a facet of how the Force could be understood and applied. A council of masters guided the order, leaders from each temple who'd achieved mastery in their disciplines. The Jedi studied everything: science and mysticism, physical training and spiritual meditation. They sought knowledge from all sides. They were trying to avoid the extremes that had caused tragedy for the Celestials. Though they probably didn't know the full story, some cultural memory might have survived. The concept of Bendu, meaning balance, appeared in their teachings. The same concept would show up in early Jedi lore thousands of years later. Maybe the Whills passed along fragments of knowledge. Maybe Force-sensitive chroniclers received visions of the Ones and their struggle. Either way, the ideas echoed forward. For a long time, the Jedi maintained their balance. But eventually, nature took its course. Some individuals started preferring Ashla exclusively. They saw the light side as pure and safe, viewing Bogan as too dangerous to touch. Others were seduced by Bogan's power. They wanted to tap into the dark side without restraint, without the limitations the Jedi philosophy imposed. Human nature pushed people toward extremes, the very thing the Jedi tried to prevent. Around 24,500 years before the Battle of Yavin, a Jedi named Zendor embraced Bogan completely. He rejected the balanced philosophy and gathered followers who felt the same way. These became known as the Legions of Letau. They rose against the orthodox Jedi in what history would call the First Great Schism, the first time light and dark fought each other among mortals. Something interesting connects to this. Ancient prophecies about a chosen one who would bring balance to the Force might date back to this exact period. Early Jedi seers already foresaw a long struggle between light and dark. They predicted the need for someone to restore equilibrium. This knowledge parallels the tale of the Ones in striking ways. Some sources even mention that the Chosen One prophecy was one of the oldest prophecies that Mortis held in ancient holocrons, which raises a question. How did mortal Force users know about Mortis? Here's where it gets fascinating. According to some legend sources, Zendor himself journeyed to Mortis during his quest to understand the Force. Somehow, around the time he was falling to the dark side, Zendor found the gateway. He met the Ones, the father, daughter, and son. The father presumably tried to convince Zendor not to pursue darkness, showed him what that path led to. But Zendor left unconvinced. He felt the One's view of the Force was no more valid than any other perspective. So he continued down his dark path and started the war on Tython. If this account is true, it means knowledge of the Ones wasn't entirely lost. At least one seeker found them. And he presumably brought back stories, even if he rejected their message. This explains why later Jedi texts referenced ancient Mortis prophecies. The Whills, or early Jedi holocrons, contained fragments of that cosmic saga, even if most people didn't fully comprehend what they were reading. Around this time, devices called holocrons started appearing. These were Force-imbued crystals that could store knowledge and even preserve the personality of their creator. The Rakata had holocron technology and shared it with others, including Sith King Adas. But the Jedi might have developed their own versions independently. Maybe a Jedi seer created what they called a Codex of Balance, storing their philosophy in crystal form. The Whills, always watching, would have noted this development. Perhaps they even guided it subtly, inspiring certain individuals to become keepers of knowledge. Archivists who would preserve wisdom for future generations. The idea of guardians protecting ancient knowledge became a recurring theme. The Jedi would eventually have a council of first knowledge with a chief librarian. Various Force sects like the Dai Bendu monks and the Aang Ti maintained their own archives. All of them echoed the Whills' mission to record and preserve. During this early period, certain figures emerged as champions of their respective philosophies. The sources don't always give us clear names, but we can identify archetypes. There would have been light side leaders who embodied Ashla. Perhaps someone like Da'an the Seer, a master who warned about the temptations of Bogan and promoted the balanced path. This figure might have led the Jedi Council and possibly even contributed to the Chosen One prophecy. On the other side stood dark side devotees, someone like Kor Ves Bogan, the Dark Keeper. a figure who intentionally walked the left-hand path and preserved forbidden knowledge. Maybe a mentor to Zendor. Maybe someone who ensured that even if the light side won battles, dark side lore would survive in hidden holocrons. These might be symbolic representations more than specific historical figures, but they represent the split that was forming among mortal force users. The tensions on Tython eventually erupted into full war. Around 25,700 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Force Wars began. Those who leaned toward Ashla fought those who'd embraced Bogan. The conflict raged across Tython, and the planet itself reacted violently. When the Force fell out of balance there, the environment responded with storms and earthquakes. By the time the war ended, Tython was ruined. The Bogan faction, the Dark Jedi, were defeated and exiled. They fled into the galaxy, some eventually finding their way to Korriban, where they'd encounter the Sith species. The victorious light side faction reorganized. They dropped a letter from their name and became simply the Jedi Order. They dedicated themselves fully to the light side, abandoning the balanced philosophy that had defined the Jedi. The Jedi relocated to worlds like Ossus and eventually joined the Galactic Republic as peacekeepers. They'd become the galaxy's defenders, the champions of light. But they'd also lost something in the process, that understanding of balance, that recognition that light and dark were two halves of a whole. The Jedi carried forward certain knowledge from the Jedi era. They kept prophecies about a chosen one. They maintained references to ancient Mortis myths in their texts, but the full context was lost. They knew fragments of the story without understanding the whole. They had pieces of a cosmic puzzle that wouldn't make complete sense for thousands of years. The defeated Dark Jedi didn't disappear. They went into hiding. Some followed Zendor's legacy. Others sought refuge among the Sith species on Korriban. Eventually, they'd interbreed with the Sith and create the Dark Lords of the Sith, a new tradition dedicated to the dark side, opposed to everything the Jedi represented. The knowledge of Bogan survived. The dark side teachings persisted in holocrons and secret texts, waiting for future generations to rediscover them. The first mortal force users had inherited a galaxy shaped by celestials, but now had to navigate light and dark without divine oversight. And they recapitulated exactly what happened with the Ones. There was initial balance with the Jedi. Then came a split and conflict through the Force Wars. Finally, a new equilibrium emerged, though it was more like a stalemate. Jedi devoted to light, Sith devoted to dark. Both sides convinced they were right. This cycle was now in motion and would continue for millennia. The eternal struggle between Jedi and Sith, light against dark, balance sought but rarely achieved. Knowledge from the Celestial era survived in symbols Ashla and Bogan as names for light and dark. The concept of balance between extremes. Prophecies about a chosen one who would restore equilibrium. These weren't just abstract ideas. They were echoes of actual cosmic events. The war between the Ones, the transformation of Abeloth, the shattering of the Celestials. The Whills presumably noted all of this in their journal. The torch had been passed to younger races. The Force, once the dominion of gods, was now being interpreted through the hearts and minds of ordinary beings. Those ordinary beings would shape galactic history for the next 30,000 years. They'd fight wars over the Force's nature. They'd build orders and temples. They'd create prophecies and train generations of students, all without fully understanding what had come before. All without knowing they were standing on the shoulders of giants who'd nearly torn the universe apart. The first mortals had taken their first steps into a larger world. They'd discovered the Force and begun learning its mysteries. But the deepest mysteries, the oldest truths, remained hidden. The age of the Force gods had ended. The age of mortal Force users had begun. After the Celestials vanished, someone had to fill the void. Unfortunately, the species that stepped up were the worst possible choice. The Rakata came from a tropical world called Lehon, also known as Rakata Prime. They were amphibious humanoids with a natural connection to the dark side of the Force. And they were cruel. During the Celestial era, the Rakata had been relatively primitive, but they caught the attention of the Kwa, an elder race that served the Celestials. The Kwa made a decision they'd regret for millennia. They taught the Rakata about the Force. They shared advanced technology, including infinity gates that could teleport people across the galaxy. The Kwa hoped to uplift the Rakata, to help them become something better. Instead, the Rakata ignored every lesson about balance. They fell completely to the dark side. Their natural cruelty combined with new knowledge created something terrifying. With the Celestials gone and no masters to check them, the Rakata turned everything they'd learned into weapons. They built an empire on conquest and slavery. By 35,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Infinite Empire was born, and it would become one of the darkest chapters in galactic history. The Rakata didn't invent their technology from scratch. They were scavengers and reverse engineers. They found celestial ruins and learned from them. They studied Kwa artifacts and repurposed them. Everything they built was a twisted version of what came before. The Kwa had infinity gates for peaceful travel. The Rakata tried to steal that technology for conquest. When the Kwa realized their mistake, they destroyed their own gates rather than let the Rakata have them. But the damage was done. The Rakata had learned enough to create their own nightmares. Their greatest creation was the Star Forge. Built in orbit around a star near Lehon, it was essentially a factory powered by darkness itself. The Star Forge drew energy from two sources. First, from the star it orbited, using stellar power on scales the Celestials had once mastered. Second, from the dark side of the Force, specifically from fear and hatred. The Rakata fed Force-sensitive slaves into the system. The terror and suffering of those slaves became fuel. The Star Forge converted negative emotions into raw production capacity. It could manufacture starships endlessly, an infinite fleet. As long as you kept feeding it fear and anger, it would keep building war machines. This was celestial engineering principles turned completely inside out. The Celestials had built to create and nurture life. They'd constructed star systems where civilizations could thrive. The Rakata built to dominate and destroy. They took the concept of stellar engineering and weaponized it. The Star Forge even became semi-sentient. It fed off the Rakata's negative emotions and amplified them in return. This created a feedback loop. The more the Rakata used it, the crueler they became. The crueler they became, the more efficiently it produced weapons. It was corrupting them, slowly turning them into something worse than they already were. The Rakata deployed other celestial-style technology too. On Kashyyyk, they installed a terraforming machine meant to accelerate plant growth. The Celestials had shaped entire ecosystems across the galaxy with similar tools. But the Rakata's device malfunctioned. It turned Kashyyyk's forests into a tangled nightmare of giant Roshar trees. The planet became almost impossible to navigate at ground level. They had pieces of the gods' toolkit, but none of the wisdom to use them properly. Even their hyperspace technology was a crude copy. The Celestials had perfected faster-than-light travel and could move between any star systems. The Rakata's hyperdrives were limited. They could only reach force-rich worlds, and even then, the range was unstable. At the height of their power, the Infinite Empire spanned about 500 worlds. That sounds impressive until you realize the Celestials had influenced thousands. Some scholars think the celestial hyperspace barrier was still in effect, blocking Rakatan expansion. The anomalies at the galaxy's edge kept them confined mostly to the eastern regions and unknown regions. The Rakata confirmed the Celestials' plan without knowing it. They were caged by technology they didn't understand. There's an interesting theory about this era, one that connects back to Abeloth. During the time of Rakatan dominance, roughly 35,000 to 25,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, Abeloth was supposedly imprisoned in the Maw. But the Killik memories mentioned something important. Abeloth could escape whenever the current of the Force was altered. And when she got loose, she thrived on chaos and conflict. What if one of her periodic escapes happened during the height of the Infinite Empire? Think about it. The Rakata were already dark side users, already cruel. But the scale of their brutality was abnormal. They enslaved billions. They committed acts that even other dark side cultures found excessive. Maybe Abeloth's presence poisoned the galactic atmosphere, her influence pushing the Rakata from merely cruel to genuinely monstrous. The Rakata developed technology specifically to harvest fear and hatred from Force-sensitive slaves. They literally fed off darkness as an energy source. Who else do we know that thrives on fear, death, and chaos? Abeloth. Perhaps the Rakata stumbled onto this concept because Abeloth's telepathic whispers from the Maw inspired them. The very emotion that empowered her became the foundation of their technology. One Rakatan warlord stands out as especially suspicious. Soa, called the Infernal One. He delved into dark rituals so extreme that even other Rakata feared him. Eventually, they imprisoned him in stasis on Belsavis in a facility called the Eternity Vault. The nickname Infernal One suggests something beyond normal dark side corruption. What if Soa unknowingly communed with Abeloth's distant echo? What if he found celestial artifacts that showed him visions of her? That would explain why he became too dangerous even for the Rakata to tolerate. There's also the mysterious collapse of the Infinite Empire around 25,200 years before the Battle of Yavin. A plague swept through the Rakata, stripping them of their Force connection. Without the Force, their technology stopped working. Their slaves revolted. Everything fell apart within centuries. What if that plague coincided with Abeloth being re-imprisoned? The Ones might have returned one last time to shackle her. That cosmic event could have manifested as widespread destabilization that wrecked the Infinite Empire. Whenever galactic chaos peaked, Abeloth was there. When Abeloth was put down, the Chaos Makers fell too. This is speculation, but it fits the pattern. The Infinite Empire conquered aggressively. They targeted worlds rich in the Force because they needed Force-sensitive populations to power their technology. They overran Kashyyyk and left that malfunctioning terraforming device. They subjugated Dathomir, home of the Kwa, as revenge for earlier resistance. Interestingly, Kwa legends say the abuse of their infinity gates created wounds in Dathomir that called the Rakata there like instruments of fate. As if dark deeds attract dark forces, they fought the Gree and drove them back to their enclave. Another celestial-serving culture trimmed down and contained. On Belsavis, they enslaved creatures called builder insects to construct a massive prison complex. The Rakata locked up beings they considered too dangerous, rogue warlords like Soa, alien threats they couldn't control. One prisoner was called the World Razor. This entity had supposedly consumed thousands of worlds before the entire Infinite Empire managed to subdue it. Many suspect the World Razor was either a chaotic entity similar to Abeloth or one of the Celestials' ancient cosmic rivals. Either way, if the Rakata fought something on that scale, they were meddling with forces the Celestials had once kept in check. They discovered Korriban and encountered the Sith species. The Rakata taught Sith King Adas about holocrons, those force-imbued knowledge storage devices. Adas eventually repelled the Rakata from Korriban, but the knowledge remained. The Sith species gained holocron technology and used it to preserve their dark lore for millennia. They visited Coruscant and enslaved early humans. But interestingly, some human groups were already spacefaring using sleeper ships. They spread to other worlds outside Rakatan control. That would prove crucial later when the Infinite Empire collapsed. Around 25,200 years before the Battle of Yavin, everything changed. A plague swept through the Rakata. This wasn't a normal disease. It did something unprecedented. It severed their connection to the Force. Suddenly, an entire species of Force users couldn't touch the energy field that powered their civilization. Their hyperdrives failed. Their weapons stopped working. The Star Forge became useless to them, and their slaves saw the opportunity. Revolts erupted across hundreds of worlds. The beings the Rakata had oppressed rose up and struck back. Within a couple of centuries, the Infinite Empire collapsed completely. Many Rakata were eliminated by former slaves or fighting among themselves. The survivors on Lehon devolved into a primitive state. Nobody knows where the plague came from. Some theories suggest rebel slaves engineered it. Others point to ancient Greek texts that mention curses like gray swallowing and hollowers of beings, suggesting supernatural punishment. Maybe the Force itself intervened. Maybe the Celestials, if any remained as ethereal entities, finally acted to end the tyranny. Or maybe Abeloth's imprisonment created a shockwave that manifested as this plague, the unraveling of those who dared usurp the gods' tools. The celestial hyperspace barrier might have played a role too. If it trapped the Rakata with their afflicted worlds, preventing them from seeking help or escaping, that would explain the speed of their collapse. Whatever the cause, the result was clear. The Infinite Empire fell as quickly as it had risen, but they left marks on the galaxy that would last forever. The ruins of the Star Forge remained hidden in the Lehon system. Thousands of years later, a Jedi named Revan would discover them and face the same corruption the Rakata had. Holocrons became widespread because of the Rakata. They'd shared the technology with King Adas. Eventually, the Jedi encountered Rakatan, or Sith holocrons, and created their own versions. The concept of storing knowledge in Force-imbued crystals spread across the galaxy thanks to the Rakata. Even languages were influenced. Terms like Ashla for the light side and Bogan for the dark side might have originated from Rakatan, or celestial tongues. The Jedi used those words. So did later cultures. The connections blur across time, but the influence persists. On Lehon, some Rakata retained partial Force sensitivity. They formed a tribe called the Elders, who kept records of their history. They wanted to warn anyone who found them about what had happened. Revan encountered them nearly 20,000 years after the Infinite Empire fell. The story had survived in oral tradition all that time. Later generations who found massive ruins didn't always know who built them. They started calling the creators the Builders. Sometimes that meant Rakata. Sometimes it meant Celestials. The line blurred. Both had built wonders that seemed impossible. Both had vanished, leaving only echoes behind. The Rakata were a dark mirror to the Celestials. They tried to emulate the Force gods by wielding creation for themselves, but they lacked morality and balance. Their empire rose through Force technology and fell catastrophically when they lost that connection. It echoes the Celestials' own story. The gods rose by wielding the Force and fell when one of their own abused it. The Wills probably recorded this as proof that knowledge without wisdom leads to ruin. But the Rakata served another purpose. They inadvertently preserved knowledge of the Celestial era. Their use of celestial technology and their distribution of holocrons meant that later generations would always wonder about who came before. Jedi texts from the Republic era speculated about the architects who predated the Rakata. Scholars debated whether certain ruins were celestial or Rakatan in origin. The echoes of the architects lived on in historical records because the Infinite Empire had touched those ancient wonders and passed the stories forward. The age of the Force gods had definitively ended. The age of mortal civilizations continued, but the shadow of what came before stretched across everything that followed. The Rakata proved that mortals with godlike tools would inevitably misuse them. The pattern would repeat throughout history. Power without wisdom, ambition without restraint, technology without ethics. Every generation would learn this lesson. Most would learn it too late. Abeloth's story didn't end when the Celestials locked her in the maw. She was immortal, cunning, and patient. And over tens of thousands of years, she found ways to slip free. The Killik hive, Thuruot, remembered the pattern. Abeloth could escape her prison whenever the current of the Force was altered or the flow of time changed. Major imbalances in the Force created cracks she could exploit. Each time she got loose, chaos followed. Then she'd be captured again. This cycle repeated for millennia, a cosmic game of prison break and recapture that most of the galaxy never knew was happening. Galactic historians have noticed mysterious catastrophes throughout pre-Republic history, events with no clear cause that devastated entire regions. Some scholars now suspect these connect to Abeloth's periodic escapes. Around 100,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, evidence shows mass extinctions on many core worlds climate shifts that wiped out species. This was roughly when Abeloth was first imprisoned. Maybe she got loose briefly during her initial capture. Maybe her rampage before being locked up caused widespread damage that took millennia to recover from. Around 30,000 years before Yavin, the Celestials vanished and the Rakata revolted. We talked about how the war with Abeloth weakened the Celestials. But what if she escaped again during that chaos? Her presence could have been the final push that collapsed celestial civilization. Her influence might have fueled the Rakata's cruelty, turning an already dark species into something worse. There's even a legend about something called the Fulcrum Winter, around 15,000 years before Yavin. Stars dimmed across the galaxy. Species went extinct for no apparent reason. Some fringe scholars wonder if Abeloth literally drained life force on a galactic scale during that period. The pattern fits her cycle. Things would be stable. Then sudden chaos would erupt without clear cause. Supernovas, force plagues, mass madness, environmental collapse on numerous systems. Then, just as suddenly, things would settle, as if an unseen threat had been contained again. Each time Abeloth escaped, the son and daughter returned to stop her. But how could they do that if they were sealed away on Mortis? The father must have allowed them to intervene when Abeloth threatened creation. Maybe the ones had a way to project themselves through the monolith gateway. Maybe they could temporarily leave Mortis in emergencies. Imagine the sequence Abeloth breaks out of the maw. Somewhere, dormant celestial technology detects the breach. Centerpoint Station's systems raise an alert. The daughter and son awaken from their seclusion. They travel back to the galaxy, rally the remaining Killiks, or activate automated protocols the Celestials left behind. Together, they defeat Abeloth and lock her back in her prison. They use Centerpoint to tighten the maw's black holes around her. They reseal whatever cracks she slipped through. This happened multiple times over thousands of years. The last time was probably not long before 20 years before the Battle of Yavin, because that's when the ones finally passed away on Mortis. From their demise until 40 years after Yavin, Abeloth stayed trapped. The longest period she remained contained. That suggests the ones were doing their job right up until they couldn't anymore. Abeloth wasn't just brute force. She was cunning. Each time she gained partial freedom, she used proxies to spread her influence. The Killiks were her favorite servants. Some hives fell under her sway when she reached out psychically. The Dark Nest trilogy shows how Killiks can absorb Force users and turn to darkness. The Gorog hive became a secret nest serving a dark master. Ancient Killik hives near the maw would have been especially vulnerable. Abeloth could seduce them with illusions of love and belonging. She called herself the beloved Queen of the Stars for a reason. Sinkhole Station was built to help maintain Abeloth's prison, but over time, her influence corrupted it. When Luke Skywalker explored the station thousands of years later, he found deranged Killik hives maintaining it. The station had become a labyrinth designed to trap and confuse intruders. It even contained samples of the font of power and pool of knowledge, the very wells that had transformed Abeloth in the first place. Some Killik queens might have served her willingly. There are obscure references to a Queen of Silence, a hive leader who cut her nest off from the collective song of the Killiks to hide their loyalty to Abeloth. This queen supposedly built hidden structures and preserved Abeloth's secrets for millennia. While other Killiks forgot their past, this hive kept pure memories of the mother and waited for her return. When the Ones passed away in 20 years before the Battle of Yavin, the galaxy lost its primary defense against Abeloth. Someone else would need to take up that responsibility. The Whills, always watching, might have guided certain individuals to maintain the prison. Grandmaster Yoda had experiences with Force entities during the Clone Wars. Perhaps he received subtle knowledge about cosmic balance that led the Jedi to unknowingly help contain Abeloth. The Chosen One prophecy takes on new meaning here. Maybe it wasn't just about destroying the Sith. Maybe it was about keeping dark side entities like Abeloth in check. Anakin encountered the Ones on Mortis. He inadvertently caused their demise by refusing to take the Father's place. In doing so, he transferred some cosmic responsibility to himself and his lineage. Luke Skywalker, Anakin's son, would ultimately fulfill that responsibility by defeating Abeloth in 44 years after the Battle of Yavin. And here's the interesting part. Luke couldn't do it alone. He needed help from an unlikely source. Darth Krayt, a Sith Lord who'd survived through dark side means. Luke and Krayt, Jedi and Sith, light and dark, working together. It took both sides unified to finish what the daughter and son once did separately. The Force itself seemed to compel them. Destiny arranging pieces on a cosmic board. The Jedi even recreated the original prison methodology at Sinkhole Station. They used ancient celestial technology to create a Force white hole opposite the Maw's black holes, trapping Abeloth's essence. Modern Jedi using tools they barely understood to cage a threat they'd only just learned existed. Throughout history, individuals stepped up as guardians without knowing it. Maybe there were secret Jedi orders dedicated to monitoring the Maw. Maybe celestial-built droids still functioned as automated wardens. But the most important guardian was Centerpoint Station itself. As long as Centerpoint systems remained active, the Maw stayed stable. The station functioned through the Imperial era and into the Yuuzhan-Vong War, and Abeloth stayed trapped. Then, in 40 years after Yavin, Jacen Solo destroyed Centerpoint Station during the Second Galactic Civil War. He had no idea what he was doing. He just saw a powerful weapon and eliminated it. That single act disrupted the Maw's structure. The prison began to fail. Abeloth sensed her opportunity. She started reaching out with her mind. By 43 years after Yavin, Jedi Knights in Luke's academy began going insane. They suffered nightmares of a being calling to them. This was Abeloth extending her influence beyond the Maw for the first time in thousands of years. By 44 years after Yavin, she emerged fully. She took on physical forms by possessing various beings. Political leaders, Force-sensitive adepts, multiple avatars spreading chaos across the galaxy. She sowed madness on Coruscant, driving Jedi insane. She aligned with the lost tribe of Sith, a group that had been isolated for millennia. This was the culmination of all her previous attempts. The galaxy faced an entity that embodied pure chaotic darkness, and this time there were no Force gods to stop her. It fell to Luke Skywalker and his allies. They fought Abeloth at Sinkhole Station. They hunted her through the Maw. They battled her avatars across multiple locations. The campaign was vicious. Abeloth had multiple bodies, multiple forms. Each time they destroyed one, another appeared. Finally, Luke and Darth Krayt struck her down together. the symbolic son of suns from the ancient prophecies, and a Sith Lord embodying a new kind of darkness. Even then, Luke speculated she might not be gone forever. Abeloth was too ancient, too connected to the Force itself to be truly eliminated. But for now, the Mother was vanquished. The cycle of her periodic returns had seemingly ended. The Skywalker line had fulfilled its cosmic destiny. Throughout ancient history, Abeloth's influence showed up in unexpected places. Certain Sith rituals echoed her abilities: mind control, illusions, shape-shifting. The Night Sisters on Dathomir worshipped the winged goddess and fanged god in their folklore. Those corresponded to the daughter and son, but they had no mother figure in their pantheon. Maybe Abeloth's memory was too fearsome to acknowledge, or maybe they channeled her power without realizing it. Their spirit ichor and madness-inducing spells had parallels to Abeloth's abilities. The Maw itself remained a haunted place throughout history. Smugglers near Kessel knew to avoid it. During the Galactic Civil War, the Empire built the Maw installation there, conducting superweapon tests. They had no idea they were destabilizing an ancient prison, no clue that something was locked inside those black holes. Abeloth waited, patient, cunning, ready to exploit any weakness. The story of the Mother demonstrates how the Celestial Era cast a shadow across all of galactic history. Events from 100,000 years ago still influenced the present. Each time Abeloth escaped, someone rose to fight her. The ones in ancient times, Luke and his allies in the modern era. The pattern held. The Whills probably recorded these recurring wars in heaven as proof of a key truth. As long as imbalance exists, entities like Abeloth will find a way to emerge. Only by addressing the root cause, by achieving true balance, could the cycle be broken. That lesson would echo through the ages. The Jedi and Sith would eventually have to come to terms with the legacy of the Force gods. They'd have to understand that light and dark weren't enemies to be vanquished, but forces to be balanced. Even when Abeloth was locked away, her fingerprints remained on the Force itself. Like shadows in dark water, fragments of her power lingered for those who knew where to look. Over millennia, dark side cults and sorcerers stumbled upon knowledge related to the bringer of chaos. Most didn't know her name or her story, but they tapped into the same kind of twisted power she'd wielded. The ancient Sith Empire formed around 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, developed rituals of madness and illusion. Dark Jedi exiles had interbred with the Sith species on Korriban, creating a new tradition of darkness. Their techniques echoed Abeloth's abilities: mind-twisting illusions, reality-warping magic, the power to drive people insane with visions, the Sith sorcerers of Tund, the prophets of the dark side. Various sects across the ages practiced similar arts. They might have called upon a Queen of the Stars or other titles without understanding who they were really invoking. Holocrons passed down from early Dark Jedi probably contained allusions to an ancient dark goddess, fragments of knowledge, pieces of a story most had forgotten on Dathomir. The Night Sisters drew on something they called chaos. Their green spirit ichor came from some distant source of power that predated their order by thousands of years. The Night Sisters worshipped the fanged god and the winged goddess in their folklore. These corresponded to the son and daughter, though the connection was lost to time. But they had no mother figure in their pantheon. That's curious. Maybe because the true mother, Abeloth, was too fearsome to worship. Maybe she became the chaos itself, the dark realm beyond death that Night Sisters warned about. Their magic involved possession of bodies, illusion crafting, physical transformation. Mother Talzin could manifest as a spirit. Old Dhaka raised armies of undead. These abilities paralleled what Abeloth could do, shape-shifting, possessing host bodies, raising thralls to serve her will. The shadows Abeloth left in the Force might have seeped into the dark pools and wells that Night Sisters drew power from. Dathomir had been devastated by the Rakata, possibly touched by celestial conflicts, a world scarred by ancient darkness. While the Night Sisters credited spirits and deities, the ultimate source of their chaotic energy could trace back to Abeloth's rampages thousands of years earlier. The Jedi Order preserved pieces of the truth in their prophecies and guarded archives. The Chosen One prophecy stood as the most important example. It spoke of someone who would bring balance to the Force and destroy the Sith. The prophecy's exact age was uncertain, but references existed in texts older than 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, probably much older. One Jedi Master suggested the prophecy might date back to the First Great Schism, around 24,000 years before Yavin. That would place it right when the Ones were last active. The original prophecy might not have been about Sith specifically. It might have been about ending cosmic imbalance. The line about destroying the Sith could have been added later as the Jedi-Sith conflict became the defining struggle. A Jedi text even stated that the Chosen One prophecy was one of the oldest prophecies Mortis held in ancient holocrons. The mention of Mortis is key. It suggests the Jedi were curating knowledge from that legend. Ancient Jedi on Tython or Ossus probably received visions of the Ones, symbolic versions that they encoded as prophecy. In the time of greatest despair, a child shall come who will destroy agents of chaos and restore balance. The Journal of the Whills included lines about this savior being known as the Son of Suns. That phrase could reference Tatooine's twin sons, but it also metaphorically suggests the Son of the Father, an interesting connection to Mortis mythology. After Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka encountered the Ones during the Clone Wars in 20 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Jedi Council kept records. They didn't publicize it widely, but the knowledge influenced their thinking. Grandmaster Yoda underwent spiritual journeys that connected him to Force entities. He might have understood that the ancient Guardians were gone or dying, that a great imbalance existed. He pinned his hopes on the Chosen One prophecy being true. Hence, his openness to Anakin despite reservations. Anakin himself directly encountered the Ones. The Father asked him to take his place, to become the new keeper of balance. Anakin refused. In Legends, this refusal set in motion events that led to Abeloth's final freedom decades later. By not taking the Father's place, Anakin left the galaxy without its cosmic guardians when they passed away. The Jedi kept Mortis knowledge in their secret archives. Luke Skywalker would later find mission reports about the incident. Meanwhile, the Sith pursued their own dark paths that brushed against these cosmic truths. Darth Plagueis pondered celestial legends. He wondered if the Celestials had merged with the Force to guide destiny. His obsession with controlling midichlorians and achieving eternal life paralleled Abeloth's desire to become immortal and join the Ones. Darth Tenebrous, Plagueis's master, researched cosmic balance and foresaw the coming of Anakin. These dark sages felt limits set by the Force's will, and like Abeloth, they tried to break those limits. The Sith obsession with immortality echoed Abeloth's saga. She was a mortal who achieved twisted eternal life. Perhaps Sith spirits in the realm of chaos occasionally encountered echoes of Abeloth and were driven mad. Some Old Republic-era Sith went insane, searching the Beyond Shadows realm. Others encountered the Mind Walkers, a group later tricked by Abeloth's promises of immortality. From a wide view, history played on a repeating loop. Balance established. Corruption tilts toward chaos. A chosen agent restores balance temporarily. Then the cycle repeats. Celestials brought balance. Abeloth created chaos. The Ones restored balance. The Celestials departed, leaving balance precarious. The Rakata and Sith brought chaos. The prophecy promised balance through a chosen one. Abeloth returned with chaos. Luke and his allies restored balance. The Whills likely noted this cyclical nature. It matched ancient philosophies about Ashla and Bogan, about balance being dynamic rather than static. An equilibrium constantly upset and corrected. Anakin Skywalker fulfilled the prophecy by destroying the Sith in 4 years after the Battle of Yavin. He ended Palpatine and himself, bringing a period of balance to the Force. But the story didn't end there. After beating Abeloth, Luke had a realization. No external celestial figures remained to balance the Force. It was now up to mortal Jedi and Sith to maintain that equilibrium going forward. We are the Ones now. That was essentially Luke's conclusion. The Jedi must embody the daughter's legacy of light and altruism. The Sith embody the son's legacy of darkness and ambition. But perhaps with wisdom gained through ages of conflict, both sides could find new understanding. Luke even suggested that the eternal war might need to end in cooperation rather than annihilation. A controversial view, but one influenced by what he'd learned about the Ones. This aligned with the idea that the Force now self-corrects through its living wielders rather than relying on godlike intermediaries. Throughout history, certain figures kept the flame of cosmic truth alive. Prophets of the Whills, seers who received visions from the Force and acted as messengers. Sages like the Aang-Ti monks who believed in the potentium, the idea that the Force was one unified energy. Chroniclers who compiled findings about the Celestials and Ones. These individuals guided future generations away from repeating past mistakes. They preserved the notion that the Force strives for balance and every shadow is met with light. By the Legacy era, over 130 years after the Battle of Yavin, the pattern continued. Another Sith empire rose. Cade Skywalker balanced between light and dark to restore peace. The cycle remained eternal as long as the Force existed. But perhaps each iteration brought the galaxy closer to true understanding. With Abeloth gone, one of the worst manifestations of imbalance was eliminated. Future conflicts would be more limited. Moral and political struggles rather than cosmic horror threatening to devour reality. The Whills record might summarize it this way. From balance was born discord, and from discord balance was reborn, time and again. In the twilight of the Force gods, mortal Jedi and Sith inherited the roles of light and dark. Only through wisdom and occasional unity could the cycle be transcended. The galaxy learned through hard experience that light and dark are both part of the cosmic tapestry. Too much of either leads to catastrophe. Absolute order becomes stagnant and repressive. The Jedi, at their dogmatic height, arguably invited the dark side to rise in response. Absolute chaos is obviously destructive. Abeloth proved that case definitively. The recurring wars, whether between Jedi and Sith or Celestials and Abeloth, reflected the Force's ongoing attempt to find equilibrium. Balance wasn't a one-time achievement. It was an eternal journey. In the end, one group watched everything, recorded everything. The Whills. These immortal chroniclers, whether actual beings or living metaphors for the Force's memory, kept the Journal of the Whills a record spanning from the rise of the Celestials to the fall of the last Sith. They wrote in poetic, almost scriptural language, and they noted something important. The Force itself was the true main character of this story. The Force sought balance, was challenged by darkness, restored by light. An endless dance that played out across 100,000 years. One of the closing entries in the journal describes a vision. Twin suns rising over the horizon of a world once shrouded in darkness. This image works on multiple levels. Literally, it could reference Tatooine's twin suns, the same suns Luke Skywalker gazed at as a young man, yearning for adventure beyond his desert home. Metaphorically, it represents two sources of light bringing dawn after a long night. Two Skywalkers, Luke and Leia, carrying hope forward. Two generations working together to heal what was broken. In mythic terms, those twin suns might represent the daughter and son finally reconciled, no longer fighting but working as two complementary forces, light and dark in harmony rather than conflict. The phrase "son of suns" appears in early Jedi prophecies and Whill writings. Some believed Luke embodied this, born under twin suns, son of the Chosen One, bringing a new dawn to the galaxy. With the father gone, his role didn't disappear. It transformed. The father's mantle passed to the many. Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order realized they had to become keepers of balance, not just warriors against darkness, but active maintainers of equilibrium. Luke taught his students to listen to the will of the Force, to proactively live their values rather than just react to threats, to become instruments of balance in the same way the Father once was. This was the echo of the Father's wisdom living in mortal hearts. The same principle carried forward by beings who understood its importance. The journal would highlight Anakin Skywalker's crucial role, the chosen one who destroyed the Sith and brought balance. However, temporarily, his destiny extended through his bloodline. Abeloth was freed partly because Anakin refused the Father's offer. So it was fitting that Anakin's son ended Abeloth's threat permanently. The Whills might phrase it this way: in the time of greatest chaos, the Chosen One's blood brought harmony. The Son of the Suns set right what had been corrupted. Abeloth had usurped power from the Celestials. The Skywalker line fulfilled the cosmic balancing role that the Celestials and Ones once maintained. But the concept of a Chosen One extends beyond just Anakin. Perhaps every era produces someone who rises to meet darkness when it threatens to overwhelm. Luke refounded the Jedi and faced threats the old order never imagined. Leia brought political balance to a fractured galaxy. Cade Skywalker in the Legacy era became a bridge between light and dark to end a new Sith empire. The pattern suggests something. When darkness rises, light rises to meet it. The Force itself chooses champions appropriate to each age's challenges. The epilogue doesn't claim balance was achieved forever. The Whills understand eternity. They know the cycle continues, but they end on hope. Each iteration of the cycle brings higher understanding. The galaxy learns through pain and rebirth. Slowly, steadily, it inches closer to true harmony. The Whills envision a distant future where the split between light and dark is transcended, where the Force sings in one unified chorus. But until that time comes, the tale of balance and temptation will repeat, and the Whills will watch and record as they always have. When the Ones passed away in 20 years before the Battle of Yavin, Mortis disappeared. The realm vanished in a flash of light, leaving no trace. This marked the literal end of the Force God's era. The celestial temple stood empty. The mantle passed fully to mortal Force users. The Force itself reclaimed Mortis, integrating it back into the cosmic whole. Maybe that's why the Force fell out of balance after the Ones died. The containment for the sun's darkness was gone. No father to maintain equilibrium. Balance wouldn't return until Anakin's sacrifice decades later. The defeat of Abeloth represented the last great echo of the Celestials' fall. With her gone, that ancient chapter finally closed. The epilogue looks forward to renewal. He saw Alana Solo, Han and Leia's granddaughter, a child of the Skywalker bloodline. She sat on the throne of balance in a vision of peace. A united galaxy, humans and other species working together. Maybe even humans and Killiks, bringing that ancient relationship full circle. The prophecy called her the daughter of destiny, a wise leader who would bring lasting peace. The Whills might envision that scene. After cosmic storms and wars between gods, a peaceful image. A child playing under golden sunlight. A galaxy finally at rest. The twin suns rising could symbolize this unity. Two peoples, two philosophies, coming together instead of tearing each other apart. In their final analysis, the Whills acknowledge that while the War of the Force Gods has ended as a story, its principles live on. They might close with an invitation, a message to anyone who hears this chronicle. The brightest light casts the darkest shadow. From shadow, light reemerges. True balance is found in understanding, in harmony with the Force. This ends the chronicle of the War of the Force Gods, but the eternal song of the Force continues. After all the cosmic battles and reality-bending conflicts, the final image is humble, natural, hopeful. Maybe it's Luke and his friends on Endor, watching the sunrise after the Empire fell. Maybe it's simply Tatooine's twin suns climbing slowly into the sky. A new day dawning, many more to follow. It's peaceful, optimistic, a reminder that even after the darkest conflicts, hope endures. Balance can be restored. The age of the Force Gods ended 100,000 years ago, but their story shaped everything that came after.